How do we help technology providers get in with these great companies, and how do we help these great companies that want to innovate and want to adopt these new tools actually do so in a way that meets the bar that they have set for themselves, or that their industry has self-regulated, or the government in many cases has mandated.
Welcome to our podcast, of the Ground Up, where we interview startup founders exploring their journeys, their success, challenges, and lessons learned. We hope you be inspired in discovering what it takes to build a thriving startup. I'm your host, Jake Aaron Villarreal, and excited to have with us today Austin Ogilvie, founder of Thoropass, a New York-based startup that's raised $98 million in funding. Austin, welcome to the show.
Jake, what's going on, man? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for joining. A little bit about Austin. Austin is originally from San Francisco, went to a boarding school on the East Coast, attended the University of Virginia, and currently resides in New York. Prior to founding Thoropass, he built the data science platform startup Yhat, which was acquired by Alteryx. So I guess before we really dive in here, walk us through, you started in San Francisco, which is great. I'm from the Bay Area. I know that area well, hub of technology. And you move to the East Coast and go to boarding school. Walk me through that experience. It sounds like it could be really fun. What was the decision around that? And what was the impact for you now looking back as maybe an entrepreneur?
Yeah. How much time you got? Definitely unusual for folks on the West Coast to go east, just in general, to boarding school at all, I suppose. My parents both were from the East Coast, are from the East Coast, and I had three older siblings. Sadly, one passed away recently, but yeah, all three of them went east, and it was just something that was important for our parents to expose us to. And for me, it was a real door opener, to be honest. It was great. A lot of people ask, like, wow, what did you do? They shipped you off. Very much the opposite. I went to a school called Choate, and it was a remarkable experience. So I go back often, actually, and I like to spend time with the students and with applicants and so forth. So still pretty plugged in.
That's great. Now, was that an all boys school, or is it
no co-ed? Yeah, like co-ed. 800 students in Connecticut.
Great, very cool. Yeah, I wished I would have done that. It sounds like a good experience. Oftentimes you get into college and you might go abroad or do a semester somewhere else and kind of get that independence built in. Did that have any impact on your independence?
I mean, absolutely. You go away at 14, it really forces you to develop your own preferences, your own opinions, your own worldview, which obviously we all do at some moment in life, but just getting a jump on it was tremendous. And in San Francisco, it's my hometown. I have a soft spot in my heart, and I love it, and it's always there. And now working in tech, there's just ample opportunities abound to be in San Francisco professionally. So it's not for everybody, but definitely I can highly recommend. And you lose nothing to just go check them out. If you're an eighth grader aspiring to take a look, I highly recommend.
Great. Cool. You got into technology. How did you do that? Did you study computer science? What was your transition to go from school and then getting into the tech space, being on the East Coast?
Honestly, so I studied Arabic and Spanish and got a degree in political science. So definitely fell into tech inadvertently, though very fortunately. I had an internship between summers at UVA at a company called EverFi in DC. And this was like my first exposure to entrepreneurship. It was three founders and me, the intern, in a tiny house on M Street. Now EverFi has gone on to do great things. They've raised tons of money and employ thousands of people and have really crushed it. But at the time, it was just, day one startup stuff. But that experience exposed me to the possibility that you could make stuff for a living. I had no idea that this was on offer as a career path. And, I think they're doing a lot better in schools now and conditioning students to understand that, if you're not strictly a math science person, computer science is not eliminated from the possible things that you can spend your time doing. And I just gotta say, like the tools available to learn to teach yourself things are just incredible these days. And turns out, a sufficiently motivated person interested in technology, you get Stack Overflow and Coursera and Udemy, and off you go.
So is that your path? You self-taught yourself around product and technology and learned to code. How deep did you go?
Yeah, so after my internship that summer, I knew that I wanted to find a full-time gig in tech at that moment. And coming out with all these languages and a political science degree, it's sort of unclear where you fit within the technology ecosystem. Um, but quickly discovered this product management field, which is really quite remarkable. It's a cross-functional sort of gig at the intersection of all kinds of, parts of the organization. My first job out of school was at another tech company in New York called On Deck Capital, which is like a small business lending company using alternative data and applied machine learning to make lending decisions to small businesses, restaurants, and so forth. And a lot of the stuff that we were building, very small business oriented apps, but they behave very much like consumers, right? So iPhone apps, web apps that are for normal people to use to apply for credit and stuff. And just doing that job, you are so close to software engineering day in, day out. You just become very curious, and Python, R, SQL are tools that you quickly find a use for after you've sort of pushed the boundaries of Excel, et cetera. And it was a really interesting moment. I graduated in 2010, and this whole field of data science was just sort of emerging. And as a product manager working with data scientists, I just sort of got into all of that stuff. And, I'm very grateful for that experience for sure, but a lot of it was self-taught.
Yeah, that's really incredible. Yhat was a data science platform. What was the problem you were solving with that? And how did you go about getting acquired? It's really a goal of a lot of companies, but sometimes you do it because that's the goal. Sometimes it happens because you need to. What was the process like for you?
Yeah, so I guess for starters, like while my co-founder and I were both product managers at On Deck for several years, and a lot of what On Deck was doing, was right when the R and Python statistical programming ecosystems were sort of coming about in a new way. There were, historically there have been quantitative analysis being done in different companies for a long time, but what was different is these open source tools were becoming massively popular and sort of overtaking SAS and MATLAB, these historical, very expensive statistical programming languages that have, tremendous enterprise support. And the pro for adopting open source is like all of these people are coming out of the universities with R and Python skills. Wes McKinney had just published the Pandas package for Python, which kind of changed everything. Scikit-learn was going 1.0, which was like at the time and still to this day, like one of the most popular sort of general Python machine learning toolkits. And those tools, while free and becoming increasingly popular, the data scientists of the world want to use these things. They're the cool tools. But the problem that my co-founder and I saw in using all of these new open source tools is that there's not a lot of commercial support for things like model versioning and deployment and scaling and any number of different commercial applications. We had to build all that stuff at On Deck. And so every piece of business logic that we would want powered by some quantitative routine that the data scientists would come up with was like a tremendous exercise to figure out how we're going to run it in production. And so that was sort of the impetus for starting the company in the first place. Is we looked at this and we were data nerds. This is the kind of stuff we're messing around with all the time for fun, using on the job all the time, but reliably frustrated with our own problems of difficulties and delays in releasing things to prod. And we just felt like, okay, here's this emergent class of data professionals that hasn't existed. And it's very obvious that every company on earth is basically going to need these people. And the academy is doing the best they can to produce more professionals with these skills. We need to look at the landscape and take a real take stock of the lack of available tools to support any number of different commercial applications. And so that's the company that we wanted to build. We left on deck in 2013. And we didn't know, we were very young. We didn't know any of the VCs or how to get going really. But the one thing we did have is a connection to a then principal at RRE Ventures, this guy, Tom Lavero, who's now at IVP. He's amazing. Tom had invested in On Deck, and he had been periodically pinging us questions about different data tools while we were at On Deck as part of his due diligence process when he was looking at deals. Of course, we didn't understand that that's what was happening, but that indeed is something that VCs definitely like to do and value. They tap the portfolio for thoughts on particular technologies and markets and stuff. And so when we had worked up the courage to quit our jobs and made the final decision, Tom was the one guy that we knew. And so we were very fortunate to have that relationship. And I remember feeling like we were breaking the rules when we snuck out from work one day during lunch and walked over there, and he made a bunch of intros, and it was sort of off to the races from there.
That's great. Did you have to pitch to raise capital? Did you raise capital for that company?
Yeah. So Greg, my co-founder, and I, we applied to Y Combinator before we quit On Deck, and we got an interview. We got an interview the first time and flew out there, and then did the interview and got denied, which is a sad flight home. And then we quit. We were still in it. We told ourselves, look, companies have been built, for many eons before YC. If we get it, we get it. If we don't, we're still going to quit and start the company. And so obviously we had to hold ourselves accountable to that. And met with Tom. We ended up raising, it took a while. I think it took probably 100 days or something, which, you were just burning your own cash and feeling nervous the whole time. But eventually we raised $1 million from RRE and a few others in New York, Bold Start, Contour Ventures, and a bunch of angel investors who would become, very, very influential mentors and helpers. Highly recommend you populate at least your seed round with very good angels for sure. And then we built for probably a year and a half and applied to YC again. And this time we got the interview and we ended up getting in. So after that, we raised another round. In total, I think we raised about $3.5 million, something like this.
That's great. Do you remember how many times you pitched in the process?
I mean, a lot of no's. The unfortunate reality is this job is about getting told no for several years. It's just part of the program.
Yeah. Well, you got acquired. That must have been a good transaction. You got a product built. It was enough value. You move on, and then from there, was this your next step? Your next stop of building what you have today at Thoropass?
Yeah. So it was 2016, 2017, we were approaching Series A kind of territory, revenue-wise, growth-wise. And we actually didn't really intend to sell the company. We were out for our A round. And to make a long story short, we had term sheets, and one of them ended up being an acquisition offer. And we sort of looked at the landscape and we're like, all right, here's this amazing Alteryx. I don't know how much you know about them. Alteryx is they had just debuted their IPO, a beloved sort of drag and drop data science tool, predominantly designed for business users who are advanced business users, not so much programmers, or at least at the time. And, Alteryx recognized the same opportunity that we saw in the first place, which is this emergent class of data professionals working with these programming tools. And they needed to add products to serve that audience to their suite. And we were a very attractive addition from that perspective on their strategic roadmap. And from our perspective, like we grinded to get like 2 million in ARR over 4 years, and post M&A, Alteryx had us in sales opportunities that we could have never dreamed of. We couldn't have used all the VC money that we had raised to bribe our way into some of these meetings, and here we were, closing big $1 million deals with Nike and McDonald's and these kinds of hallmark brands of consequence that was a true opportunity that, it was the right call. It was the right call for us.
Yeah. Timing is everything in some ways. The company you have today, we had a brief chat and you feel like the timing from what you're building and where you're at today was perfect for the market. I want you to share with the listeners specifically what your product does and the problem it solves at Thoropass. The simplest form you can share.
Sure. So Thoropass is a digital compliance automation platform and audit platform. So we help mostly software companies meet this eclectic mixed bag of security and privacy requirements. Some are regulatory. If you're holding patient data, you have to adhere to the HIPAA rules. If you're in Europe or you have a large number of California users for your app, there's all kinds of privacy rules. And there's a huge list of different standards that are out there, from SOC 2 to ISO 27001 to high trust to ITAR for arms trafficking now has a whole InfoSec component. Like, it's letter salad. And my co-founders and I had previously witnessed this in our own respective ways in our prior lives. From my perspective, Yhat, we were selling enterprise software to pretty big companies even before the M&A, some good ones too, like in Proximity, Johnson & Johnson, Square. Like these are great companies, but reliably those sales cycles would just take literally. The Intuit deal was like $380K, which at the time was monumental. It was the biggest thing I'd ever been a part of, but it took 308 calendar days or something, ridiculous to close. And almost all of that time had nothing to do with vetting the technology or piloting or a business case justification or getting the budget, secured. All of that stuff was a small fraction of the entire time. It was mostly about security due diligence, company due diligence, because those large enterprises, they take an insane amount of risk with every single vendor that they work with. You just take like JP Morgan has 5,000 software vendors. Like the chance that your company may have a bad problem maybe is small, but the chance that one of them in the portfolio of vendors with a bank like that has a problem is quite high. Actually, it happens regularly. So this vetting was a real point of friction, and a lot more than just a bottom line risk mitigation kind of analysis has to go into it as an operator, because it actually is revenue impacting. Right? You think compliance or security, your brain tends to think about, bottom line protection, but doesn't necessarily seem obvious to people at first glance, the reality, which is you really cannot do business if you don't put these organizational capabilities in place. So that was sort of the inspiration, was like, how do we help technology providers get in with these great companies? And how do we help these great companies that want to innovate and want to adopt these new tools actually do so in a way that meets the bar that they have set for themselves, or that their industry has self-regulated, or the government in many cases has mandated?
So your platform is online, where I was listening to one of your co-founders, I think Sam Lee, and he was talking about, he compares your platform to TurboTax, where it automates the manual process, it streamlines it, it's all on one platform, it's all online, and really takes the time out of the process of doing whatever you're doing. So for you specifically, it's the manual process around compliance, is that correct? And getting approved for SOX and having the reports that potentially a client you're selling your product to is going to ask you for, and you kind of help guide them through that process and simplify it. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, spot on. You should come join our sales team. That's exactly right. Like the truth is, persuading people to buy any product, but especially a new product, is very hard. Haven't you noticed? And the moment you have a buyer who is excited to buy your product, they'll say, "Send me over the order. I'll sign it right now." Oh, and please include a copy of your SOC 2 report, or please include, the latest ISO certification. Uh, and in that moment, you just want to say, no problem, it's on the way. And how to get companies in that position, it turns out, is it can be quite tricky. Sam and I both, he has a prior startup experience as well, very similar kind of experience struggling with this due diligence, SOC 2 reports, lack of tooling. The movie was very similar for both of us. And, when he and I met, it was like entrepreneurs love at first sight kind of situation, just electric. We the two of us knew we were going to build something together. And it was the first or second time that he and I met, and he pitched me this idea. He's like, why is there no standards agnostic information security platform that makes it super actionable for people like us, sufficiently motivated, hopefully somewhat intelligent people to implement the controls that banks or hospitals or different enterprise companies need to see of their vendors in order to transact. And obviously he's telling me this story initially, and I'm just sort of frothing at the mouth, having very similar kind of experiences that he was describing from his own path, both before the M&A and then also after the M&A. I mean, Alteryx, they were doing like 200 million or so when they bought us. So not like Microsoft big, but like that's a real company. They have, sellers all over the world. They're growing like crazy. And I saw it all there too, right? You have 500-600 sellers trying to close deals with an Australian bank on a Monday and Yale New Haven Hospital on a Tuesday, and then some California app with 1 million users, the next Tuesday or whatever. And like each of those stakeholders has dramatically different processes and expectations of their vendors, and for good reason. Like Rover, Airbnb for pet sitting, it holds a very different type of data, which is characteristic of totally different risk than does Genentech or a hospital. And so, like, there needs to be some kind of a TurboTax-like experience to understand what you need to do, take action, and actually how to do it. And then the software passively monitors for compliance with whatever set of rules your company needs to adhere to behind the scenes. So you're not thinking about it all the time. It's just on autopilot. When somebody asks, send over your most recent self-attestation for HIPAA, or, send your SOC report. It's easy as push of a button, in Thoropass.
How long does it take when a client signs up with you to go through the process to be compliant, to actually have a report at the end of the day they can give to a potential customer they're going to try and, work with?
So it differs for different types of standards. Let's just take SOC 2. There's two different types of reports. There's a SOC 2 type 1 and a type 2. The type 1 is basically an auditor writing an opinion on the existence of controls at your company. They basically look at the way that you are protecting against certain types of risks and certain types of attacks, and validating with their formal opinion that you have controls in place. The type 2 report, it goes further. It looks back at usually 6 months or more of operating history to say not just that the controls existed in that moment, but they were actually functional. They were achieving whatever the risk mitigation desired outcome was for a particular control. So for instance, a type 1 control might be validated to exist that you have a code review process. Before code gets merged into master, something, a process takes place where senior engineers review it, or could be any number of things. A type 2 will actually look back at 6 months or more of code that you've shipped and validate that indeed that process had been adhered to successfully and was working. And so it's a long-winded answer, but basically, you can get a type 1 report with us in 2 to 4 weeks. Usually it's pretty quick. Um, but then there's the operating history itself, which it just depends. Some auditors will work with 3 months of operating history. Usually it's 4 to 5, 6 months ish.
So you save time for the client that's going to use your platform. How about money? Are you saving them money in the process?
So the way that these audits have historically been done is really quite remarkable. You watch auditors' workflow, and they're literally looking through a list of requirements in whatever the standard is, SOC 2 or High Trust or whatever, and then they're requesting screenshots of various apps and services. So they want to know that all data is encrypted at rest, say. You are using S3 and you have Snowflake database, you got a bunch of places where data lives. And they'll just ask you, like, can you take a screenshot of the security settings for this page? And if you think about it, like, all of the digital exhaust that businesses produce is available programmatically today. You don't need to work with screenshots, and indeed, eyeballing to verify some security config is actually more error prone than it needs to be. So one of the levers that we provide our customers is this passive data ingestion for all of the consequential metadata that's relevant in these compliance audits. So the customer hooks up all of their tools and systems, their cloud provider, their business suite, et cetera. And then when it's time to go through an audit, our auditors have a suite of tools that allow them to express the tests that they need to run programmatically, fully benefiting from the structured data that the platform has collected. So this does a bunch of things. Like, one, it's a much faster process because the robot can test right away, instantaneously, versus a human has to manually eyeball and review things, et cetera. So it's just faster turnaround time on the audit. Number two, it allows us, from a business perspective, to have dramatically better productivity and production capacity on our audit team, which is essential for obviously building a great company for our shareholders and so forth. But it equally is increasing the quality, right? Programmatic tests, they don't make mistakes, So you have a sort of leveling up of the quality, an increase to the production capacity, and a faster cycle time for the customer.
Is it a product as well as professional services? Do you have to engage a team of consultants in addition to the platform?
Yeah, so each of these different audit standards has a sort of different approach to who can perform the attestation work and the assessment work. For SOC 2, you have to be a CPA. For ISO, for High Trust, there's different certifications or credentials that you need to have. And we've done all of the legwork to make sure that we have a deep bench of services professionals that have all of those skills. And they're always, upgrading and on the latest sort of techniques. And then the software has been designed from day one with auditors in mind. So, we've really gotten into the weeds about what is the spirit of this particular requirement. How can we implement a UI that allows for the full spirit of that requirement to be captured in a totally different way that's non-visual and instead programmatic. And it's been a lot of fun, to build tools for this industry has been overlooked for quite a long time. And building the Ferrari of audit workflow tools is really been a great part of the fun, for sure.
It's fascinating to me to know that compliance isn't about trying to protect you, but it's also about revenue opportunity. And I think that a lot of companies don't really see that. And they might go through it early on when they have to get it approved with a vendor or a client to work with. When should a company start looking at a product like yours? Early in the stage of their development, later in the stage? What's a good time to start approaching a company like yours?
So obviously I run the risk of sounding biased in whatever answer that I give here, but I really mean this. Like, if you have gone through the really hard part of building something that your customer actually wants and they're willing to part with large sums of money for, and they ask you to send over the sales order. Oh, and I need the SOC 2 report. You really, really want to be able to just send the SOC 2 report. It feels very bad to blow up a deal at that moment and have to go back and go through, some process. Time, as they say, enemy of all sales. That being said, it would be contextual for the particular company. But if you are having conversations where, you're knocking at the door for your first big, enterprise annual sort of subscription, you need to have already done this like yesterday, because it will be asked. It's one of the most predictable obstacles in all of enterprise sales. And the last thing I'll say about this question is the really obvious sales that you lose as a result of this feel terrible. Somebody who's been championing the purchase of your product says, look, we just had to pack it up and go with Microsoft because their thing does what we need, not as well, but like they have their ducks in a row from a security and compliance perspective. That feels bad. What feels even worse, if you have ever dealt with this in the past, is all of the opportunities that you never even had to look at because the perception that you were immature, not ready for enterprise, is glaringly obvious, right? A startup with 20 people founded 2 years ago, it just doesn't look like a great vendor for a lot of different companies that just know, we'll keep this on our radar. We'll come back in a few years and see how it's progressed. And it's like in programming, we talk about bugs that fail silently, right? A bug that's loud is a bug that you get a lot of support tickets about. You get users emailing you and complaining. They're negative tweeting at you to get support. Those are great bugs because you're very aware of them. You can fix them if you're aware of them. A bug that fails silently is the scariest of all. You've got some database write that's just not happening for 6 months. Nobody knows it. And then, you discover you just haven't saved any of this customer data for X number of months. That's a really bad problem. You can't go back in time and produce it, right? This is a very similar bug in the sales machine. It's like if a customer visits your website and they take a look at, your security docs and they don't like what they see, how many of those never fill out the lead form, never get in touch with you, never take it seriously as a candidate for an RFP submission, say? So at the risk of banging on too long on this, I'll leave it there. But for $20K to have your ducks properly in a row without needing to stress long into the night worrying about the AI CPA's definition of encryption that meets the standard, like it's the cheapest $20K you'll ever spend in exchange for perceived or actual, in many cases, legitimacy for all kinds of enterprise controls.
Really nice. I want to switch gears here a little bit. You raised close to $100 million. That's a lot of money. You have now roughly or close to 1,000 clients, which is incredible. We talked a little bit about timing in the market, timing of a product. How long did it take you to get to your first $1 million in revenue with your current company?
It didn't take that long. It took us probably 18 months maybe to get to the first $1 million. The pace just increased dramatically after that. And it's just remarkable to feel product market fit. Like I would have had a very believable story to tell you back in 2014 or 15 about having achieved product market fit with my data science company. And it would have been legit. I would have believed this story. But the difference with really finding, the right mixture of product to solution, customer wants this universally. This is not Eva or Sam or Austin being able to sell it, by themselves magically somehow. It's like very predictable sales cycle, regardless of seller, regardless of deal size. Just feels tremendously different. And it's hard to describe the feeling, but for any founders who are listening, you will know 100%, whether you're in that moment or not, and keep exploring. If you don't know for sure, you don't have it.
Yeah. There's a lot of companies that strive for that, and in the process go through a lot of left and right decisions, pivots, problems they have to solve. It's not always perfect. Walk me through one or two opportunities, or not even opportunities, but situations where you had to make some changes, where you had to, figure out a different direction with your current company. It sounds like everything's gone perfect. Give us some insights about behind the scenes that maybe are something that, others can learn from.
I mean, there's no such thing as a perfect startup. Like, they're all broken on some level. So if you're struggling to figure something out, like, take a deep breath and realize, like, it's a part of the program, to be expected. We've had a lot of trials and tribulations that are, honestly, they still surprise me. We started the company in 2019. We had five of us, including my co-founders and me, in New York. We had 5 engineers in Costa Rica. Pandemic dropped, and all of a sudden, we have no idea in that moment, what is this going to do to our business, to the macro situation. Obviously, that was a trying moment where we ended up taking. Fortunately, capital was quite available, back in the froth fest of 2020, 2021, and we raised an early Series A, which we had not expected to do at that time, and I think in retrospect, we probably could have waited a little bit, but hindsight is always 2020, right? And then, from bank failures to the macro shift, public stocks falling out, the valuations, and all the rest, there's been no shortage of trouble to deal with. Kind of runs the gamut.
What keeps you positive about things when they're not going well? Like, do you have a process you go through? Do you have some sort of mentor or coach that helps? As a leader, sometimes it's pretty lonely. If you have co-partners or co-founders, it's great. You can kind of collaborate and work through stuff. But do you have anything that helps you individually kind of get through the tougher times?
I mean, number one is co-founders that you can lean on, that you can trust. It is very lonely is the right word. You're charting your own course, which is exhilarating, and it's a profound privilege. But you don't know where you're going by by definition, and that can feel quite bad. And having co-founders to go through it with you, especially ones that come from a different perspective. Like Sam and I both come professionally from sort of similar backgrounds, both programmers, both product guys. We both did startups, etc. Sam, he grew up in China. Like, I didn't grow up in China. Like, we see the world differently for a variety of cultural reasons. And Eva, totally different profile. She was a career managing director at Citigroup, running cybersecurity, governance, and compliance for like half the bank. Like, the richness with which we look at certain problems is by definition, very robust. And, that is quite different from, seeing the world identically. You're very likely to align easily in such a partnership, but you're also very likely to miss the same nuances of a particular problem. If you have, co-founders that really complement your skills and challenge your perspectives in a productive, positive way, yeah, you can deal with a little bit of like, oh, this is a little tiring to figure this out. It's a lot of conversation. On the other hand, the decisions that come out of the machine are very good decisions most of the time. You're very unlikely to miss something collectively. So that's one, co-founders. And like, get into the real stuff. Like, what are your values? What do you want to get out of this? What matters to you? Talk about all of that stuff. It's not squishy. It's real. It's real stuff. Because when shit hits the fan, like, you need to understand, what one another's motivations and, fears and, all of that stuff is just, you have to understand it fully. And then you mentioned mentors, like 100%, like angel investors, CEOs, CTOs, other founders that have served similar customers to the ones you're going to go after, have executed similar sort of go-to markets to the one that you envision you're going to go after, solve different technical problems that are very likely to be ones that you'll encounter. You want those people on the cap table. Like, as nice and helpful some of the great VCs are, they can't know everything, and it's very nice to be able to call or text, some of these operators that have just gone through exactly what you're going through, because most problems in business and technology are like, they're not actually that unique. I think every company has some business and technical problems that are unique, but for the most part, you're going to be seeing potholes that a lot of other people have rolled their ankles in a lot of times before. And the fastest way to not break your ankle in the pothole is just ask someone who's already done it a few times, because they'll tell you and they'll help you avoid things. And they'll tell you, everything's going to be all right. Or they'll tell you when you're fucking up, they'll tell you that. So I don't know, not a silver bullet, but surround yourself with very smart people and compassionate ones, ideally.
Yeah. How big is the company today? You've grown quite a bit. Talk to me about the employees and then the type of employees you like to hire, because as we know, technology is technology, and there's processes to what your product does and how it solves problems. But at the end of the day, people are the magic behind the company, the resourcefulness, the ideas, the innovation. Talk to me about how big you are and what are the type of people that you like to bring on board.
Yeah, so we're people-wise, we're just under 200 all over the world. Definitely, we're born from the pandemic. Center of gravity in the U.S. is definitely in New York, but we're really kind of all over the place. We built our engineering team predominantly in Latin America, mostly Costa Rica, but sort of all over the place, which has been amazing for us. And culturally, we want people who are adaptable. Folks who are thrilled by challenging problems, creative people, obviously willing to and capable of thinking outside the box. Original ideas are really valuable. Founders cannot come up with every good idea forever or even for that long. So you really need people, especially at the early onset of a company, who are just thrilled by the opportunity to really inject their ideas and see them played out every Friday, for better or for worse. You get to point at the things that you did and see them out in the world. And it's not for everyone. Like, there's definitely huge ambiguity. Changes in direction are a part of the program. And it's perfectly reasonable to want a more steady and predictable line of work. But at least in our world, we want, ideally future entrepreneurs. Like, that next to winning the category, I think the thing that would make me most proud if I could look back in a few years and see is spawning more companies, more startups. So that's the kind of people we look for.
How do you know when you have the right person? What's your interview process like? And the reason I ask that is, I've interviewed 20,000 people. We help startups grow. And ultimately, each company has their own different way of trying to flush through to make sure they have the right people. And you don't always get it right. It's a hiring process. For you, what a few insightful things you can share with the listeners that if you're a founder that might be wanting to start a company, you're trying to get it right, what are some things you've learned that have been helpful, whether it's tools or questions you've asked or a process you take people through on the interview side?
So, I mean, this could be an entire day-long conversation, surely, and I make no claims to being an expert. At the early days, like, you don't have a playbook for hiring any type of person because you've never hired any people. And then each time you go through a hiring process for a new part of the org, be very deliberate in thinking about the process, because you're going to get it wrong on the first few, and record the steps. When did you email? When did you call? What did the website say? All of these little details seem pedantic in the moment, but your first AE is a prototype process for recruitment that you'll later go on to use many times. So thinking about the process, and tapping, going back to angel investors, like literally tap the people on your cap table and figure out, what are the pro tips that somebody you admire recruiting for that particular type of role has gotten good leverage from. And it may be overkill. So you have to prune it back and strip it down to meet the size and appropriateness for, the size and scale of your company. But that's how you get started. That's how we got started. And I'd also say, one of the best decisions that we've made, literally in all the decisions, it was hiring a VP of people when we did. We raised 3 million in 2019, 10 million in 2020, and then 35 in 2021. And once you have big dollars like that, you're going to hire a lot of people as the number one expense. It's like the only thing consequential to the burn rate of any of these companies is salary. So, you just look at the number and like calculate just roughly in your head how many people you're talking about bringing on. Having someone who has done that a few times, I can't overstate how valuable it has been. Like layering in the right amount of process, as you go is something you're very unlikely to do it right if you're just going seat of your pants guesswork. But the good news is there definitely is a recipe to do it the right way. It's very worth it to, invest in a serious executive that has seen the movie.
I love that. You've got a great story. I love the product you built, the story you can tell. And, with all the companies we work with, and we work with hundreds of startups, I can't tell you how many of them could utilize a product like yours. They might not even know it today, but I'm sure they'll listen to this and expect to get some calls. So, ultimately, really excited to see how things go for you. I'd love to check back in down the road and hear the progress. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you want to share, or do you think we've covered a lot of ground here?
No, this is great. I really appreciate you having me on. I was humbled that you contacted me. And if anyone wants to reach me, send them my way, thoropass.com. My email is austin@thoropass. I'm very easy to find. And I love this stuff. So I want to know what you're working on.
Great. Well, Austin, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time. And for all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us. It means the world to us that you've taken your time out of the day to listen to a great story, and look forward to catching up with you on the next episode. Take it easy, Austin. Thanks for having us, and we'll catch up with you down the road.
Cheers.
Before we wrap up, I want to give a big shout out to all the entrepreneurs that have joined to make this podcast possible. And for all the listeners for listening. It means the world to me that you chose to spend your time with us today. I'm your host, Jake Aaron Villarreal, signing off for now, but can't wait to connect with you all soon on the next episode. Take care. This show is sponsored by Match Relevant, a company that helps venture-backed startups find the best people in the market, and they do it in 3 simple steps. First, they sit down with founders to understand their story. Second, they tell their story into multiple candidate channels. And third, they schedule interviews within 48 hours. Find us at matchrelevant.com to learn more about how we do it.